In 1984, a 9-year-old boy vanished from a roadside motel in northern Nevada. There was no forced entry, no sign of struggle, just an open window, a spinning tape recorder, and an empty bed. His name was Benny Langridge, and the last person to see him was his mother. Room 104 became the center of a statewide investigation, then a cold case, then a name no one said out loud anymore. But nearly 4 decades later, someone checked into that same room and heard something behind the wall. What they found wasn't a ghost story. It was something worse. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name is Tyler Graves. I'm 38 years old, based out of Reno, Nevada, and I've spent most of my adult life chasing down stories other people forgot. I'm not law enforcement. I'm not a private investigator. I run a small podcast that covers unsolved cases, the kind that disappear from the news cycle but never really leave the people involved. I first heard about Benny Langridge when I was 26, working overnight shifts at a public radio station. I was cataloging old tape archives when I stumbled on an old PSA about missing children in Elko County. Benny's name came up just once. No photos, no suspects, just room 104, and a note that said the recorder was still running when he vanished. That stuck with me. I looked up the case later that week and found almost nothing. One article from the Reno Gazette, a mother who stepped outside for a phone call, a missing boy, no evidence, no leads, a cold file. But there was one detail that never sat right with me. The motel manager at the time noted a broken wall vent in room 104 loose screws warped cover, but never reported it during the investigation. Said it wasn't relevant. I couldn't let that go. Over the years, I kept going back to the case. I filed public records requests, interviewed retired officers, even tried to contact Benny's mother. But nothing led anywhere. The file had been closed. The room had been cleaned. Officially, there was nothing left to find. Until last summer. In August of 2023, I booked a night at Willow Pines Motel under my own name. I requested room 104, said it was for a research project. The clerk didn't ask questions, just slid me the key and warned me not to pull anything off the walls. I told him I wouldn't. I lied. The place looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Stucco walls, painted door numbers, flickering porch bulb. The air conditioner rumbled behind a rusted grate and never quite cooled the room. The curtains were yellowed, the bedspread stiff. The whole place smelled like dust and old pine. I didn't unpack, just placed my duffel on the chair, set up the recorder on the nightstand, and let the room breathe. Around 9 p.m., I started a baseline audio sweep. Nothing fancy, just walking the room with a handheld mic documenting ambient sounds. I tapped on the walls, stepped lightly across the floorboards, took photos of each corner. When I reached the far side of the room, northwest corner, about 6 feet off the ground, I noticed the wall vent. The cover was crooked. The paint around it looked newer, like someone had sealed and resealed it over the years. The screws didn't match. I stepped up onto the bed for a closer look, tapped the metal gently. It made a dull, hollow sound. Then I heard it. A soft click. Then a mechanical whir like a cassette motor trying to turn over. I thought maybe it was the air unit, but the vent wasn't connected to anything active. Then I heard it again. Click. Whir. And then, under everything else, a voice. A child's voice. Too soft to catch clearly, but I swear I heard it. Just 3 words. Don't tell you. I froze. I didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. I dropped the recorder, scrambled off the bed, and sat there on the floor staring at the vent. I replayed the last 30 seconds through headphones. Click. Whir. A pause. And then, a whisper. That was the moment everything shifted. I'd come here hoping to feel the weight of an old story. Instead, I found something still alive inside it. Something that had been waiting almost 40 years to be heard. I didn't sleep that first night. I sat in the dark with my back against the headboard watching the vent. The recorder was still running a red light, blinking every few seconds. I played the clip again at least a dozen times, click whir. Then that faint voice, a child's voice, whispering, "Don't tell you." By morning, the motel felt different. Still quiet, still stale, but heavier somehow, like the air had taken on weight. I waited until the office opened, then went to ask about the vent. The same man was behind the counter. Older leathery skin, worn polo with the motel's faded logo. He didn't look up from his paperback when I walked in. "You hear something?" he asked. I kept it simple. Just wanted to know if anyone's ever removed the vent cover in 104. He marked his page, looked up, and said, "Room's been patched more times than I can count. My dad ran this place before me. He always said 104 was off how thinner walls, bad sound bleed. But folks never stayed long enough to complain." He leaned back in his chair. "You're not the first person to come through chasing ghosts." "I'm not looking for ghosts," I said. "Just answers." He didn't push, just nodded once, then handed me a worn key to the storage room out back. "If you want records, try the ledgers. There's a filing cabinet in the back. Bring a flashlight." The storage room was low-ceilinged and smelled like mildew and motor oil. Stacks of ledger books leaned against the far wall, warped from years of damp. I found the 1984 binder near the bottom of the pile, October entries in faded blue ink. Room 104 was booked under the name A. Shuttered. Paid in cash. 2 nights. No address listed. The day Benny disappeared. I flipped back 1 page. October 12th. John H. Mills. Same room. Cash. October 14th. Marked as unoccupied. Police hold. Then, October 16th. Again. A. Shuttered. Same handwriting. He checked back in. 3 days after Benny vanished. I took photos of every entry, zooming in on the signatures. They matched. Same hand, different names. I pulled ledgers from earlier that year, May, June, July. Each one had at least 1 entry under A. Shuttered, J. Mills, or G. Harmon. Always cash. Always room 104. Sometimes 1 night, sometimes 2. Spaced about 6 to 8 weeks apart. It wasn't random. Back in room 104, I pinned the registry photos on the corkboard I'd brought. I opened my laptop, pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been building for years, missing children. Western States, 1980 through 1986. I looked for any disappearances within 100 miles of Elko County that lined up with those motel dates. 3 matched. Carrie Landers, 8 years old, vanished July 21st, 1984 in Ely, Nevada. Michael Deal, 7. Missing since May 4th, 1984 from Wells. Haley Cruz, 9. Disappeared March 13th, 1984 from Battle Mountain. Each one vanished within 24 hours of room 104 being booked. I read over each case again. Carrie's was listed as a possible custody dispute. No father on record. Case quietly closed. Michael's was marked a runaway, 7 years old. No follow-up. Haley's school listed her as transferred, but her parents never moved. I wrote 1 line in my notebook. It wasn't just Benny. That evening, I took another look at the vent. I waited until the clerk closed the office, then brought out my tools. The screws came out faster than I expected, brittle, mismatched. The metal cover dropped with a metallic creak, leaving behind a dark, narrow gap just wide enough for an arm. The smell hit me first. Dust. Old plastic. Insulation. I reached inside slowly, feeling around the edges. My fingers brushed something square. Hard plastic. Tangled in old wiring. I pulled gently until it came loose. A cassette tape. Faded label. Handwritten in marker room 104. Do not erase. The reels were still intact. I grabbed my field recorder, slid the tape in, and hit play. Click. Whir. Static. Then a voice. A child's voice. Cold, hesitant. It's cold. I want the nightlight on. A man's voice responded, calm, rehearsed. You remember what we said about that, Benny? The night is pretend. There was silence. Then the boy again. Can I have my book? We don't read in the princess room, the man replied. You know the rules? I sat frozen. The man's voice was steady, like someone reading lines from memory. The child's voice young, soft, with a slight lisp. It matched an old audio clip I'd heard from a press interview Benny's mother gave in 1998. Then came the part that stuck with me. Now say it again, Benny. A pause. This isn't real. The night is pretend. Over and over. I fast-forwarded. More static, then a different man's voice. Older, deeper. You're recording these now, the first man replied. In case he forgets. Sometimes he pretends to forget. That's risky. Not if you hide them right. A pause. I'll put this one behind the vent. I stopped the tape. It wasn't just evidence. It was documentation. They were recording him, training him. The room wasn't just a scene. It was part of the method, and someone else was involved. Another voice. Another adult. Later that night, I uploaded a clip from the tape to a private backup server, then backed it up to an encrypted drive. I labeled it Primary Source 104, Cassette, A. At 1:12 a.m., I was still awake when a message came through my podcast inbox. Private account, no real name. The message read, Are you still in Elko County? If you are, go check room 1052. I stayed there in 99. There's something in the wall between. The username was Before You Wake 88. I stared at the message for a long time, then looked back at the vent, still open. The darkness behind it was deeper than it should have been. The voice echoed in my mind again. You remember what we said about that, Benny? The night is pretend. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I just sat there and listened, waiting for the next sound behind the wall. The next morning, I drove 30 miles west to a small single-story house just outside Lemoyne. The front yard was dry, fenced with low chain link, and the mailbox still had the name Langridge written in fading black letters. The woman who opened the door looked older than I expected, not by age, but by wear. She wore a pale sweater despite the heat, and her gray hair was clipped neatly at the sides. You're the one with the podcast, she said. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. Tyler Graves. She stepped back and let me in without another word. Inside the house was quiet. The living room smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. Every shelf held family photos, some faded, some carefully dusted. On the mantel there was one of a boy in a red jacket, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of a sign that read, Willow Pines Motel. She saw me looking. That was taken the day before, she said. I told him we could get soda from the vending machine once we unpacked. He was so excited he forgot his backpack in the car. I didn't say anything. I've never moved, she said. After it happened, I stayed right here. I told myself if he ever came back, this is where I'd be. I asked if she was willing to hear something. A tape. She didn't answer, just lowered herself slowly into a chair. Her fingers reached for a chain around her neck, a silver angel smoothed from years of wear. I set the recorder on the coffee table and hit play. Click. Whir. Static. Then Benny's voice. It's cold. I want the nightlight on. And the man. You remember what we said about that, Benny? The night is pretend. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But her hand gripped the arm of the chair, knuckles pale. When the line repeated, This isn't real. The night is pretend. She finally closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. I paused the tape. That voice, she said, barely above a whisper. The man. He sounds familiar. I showed her the motel registry entries. A. Shepard, G. Harmon, J. Mills, all written in the same hand. Her eyes scanned the photos. Then she stood, crossed the room, and returned with another, a print from the same trip. She handed it to me. It was her and Benny standing outside the motel room. A man was in the background, medium build, light shirt, face turned halfway toward the camera. I didn't even remember he was in the shot, she said. But now I do. He helped us carry our bag. I was trying to calm Benny. He was having a meltdown, didn't want to go inside, and this man offered to help. Said he stayed there often. I asked what she remembered about him. White gloves, cotton. Said he had a skin condition, long-sleeved shirt. It was 100 degrees, but he never took it off. She paused, and he smelled like lemon and bleach, strong. I showed her a photograph, an old press photo of Reverend Paul Harkner from 1983. Clean-shaven clerical collar, smiling. Her body stiffened. That's him, she said, or someone who looked exactly like him. Same voice. You're sure I remember because the next morning when Benny was gone and the police were combing the property, that man stood across the parking lot, hands in his pockets. Just watching. Didn't say a word. Didn't ask if I was okay. Just stood there. Did you tell anyone I told the sheriff? He said I was in shock. That I was confused, remembering things wrong. They kept calling me hysterical. One officer told me I needed sleep more than answers. She didn't raise her voice. Just sat there. They made me feel like I did something wrong. Outside, the wind picked up. Dry leaves skittered along the sidewalk. In her backyard, behind a rusted clothesline, she showed me a box she'd kept in the attic. It held drawings, cassette labels, scraps of paper Benny had saved. At the bottom was a small red tape labeled in crooked child handwriting, for Mom, room 104. I asked if I could take it. She didn't hesitate. Just don't let them bury him again. That afternoon, back at the motel, I returned to the manager's office. I asked if any maintenance had ever been done between rooms 104 and 105, a wall replacement major repair. He stared at me a moment, then motioned toward the back. Come on. The office door creaked shut behind us. In the rear hallway, past the laundry closet, he opened a storage door and flipped on the light. A steel cabinet stood against the wall, drawers labeled in faded Sharpie. My father kept everything. Never trusted computers. We found the drawer marked 1982 to 1985 and pulled out a dusty file. Permits, receipts, inspection notices, then a maintenance form from 1982. Structural reinforcement. Room 104, interior wall. Filed by Paul Harkner. I froze. Is that name familiar to you? I asked. He nodded. Preacher from Spring Creek. Ran some kind of youth camp. Died in the 90s. Hiking accident. I folded the document and placed it in my bag. Back in room 104, I laid everything out. The tapes, the registry photos, the names. One thing still didn't fit. Why the wall? Why build a sealed vent? Reinforce a shared wall? Keep returning to the same room under different names? Then I thought about the message I'd gotten the night before. Check room 1052. There's something in the wall between. I stood near the far end of the room and knocked. Once. Then again, 2 feet over. The tone changed hollow. I measured. Room 104 was shorter than room 105 by about 3 feet. There was a void between them, a hidden space. And the red tape Benny had labeled for Mom, I hadn't played it yet. But now I had a feeling it wasn't just a goodbye. It was a map. I stayed in room 104 longer than I'd planned. The motel manager didn't seem to mind, just told me to pay in cash every couple nights and keep to myself. I said I would. I already was. The days started to blend together. I kept the blinds drawn, the recorder running the corkboard covered with overlapping photos, names, signatures. I barely left the room except for coffee or gas. I knew I should step away even for a day. But every time I packed a bag, I'd glance at the wall, that uneven stretch of drywall between 104 and 105, and I'd sit back down. The message from Before You Wake 88 kept repeating in my mind. There's something in the wall between. Room 105 had been under renovation. The clerk said a plumbing issue, nothing major, but for 2 mornings in a row I saw no workers. Just plastic tarps and tools left untouched. So on August 8th, a little after 10 in the morning, I walked the 30 feet to the open door. No one stopped me. Inside, the carpet had been ripped up, exposing warped subfloor. The furniture was pushed to the sides. The air smelled like paint thinner and sawdust. I moved straight to the shared wall, pacing out where the void would sit. I knocked once, then again 3 feet over. The tone was unmistakable hollow. I ran a stud finder across the drywall. The pattern broke where it shouldn't have. 36 inches of open space between beams with no plumbing, no wiring. Just empty air behind the insulation. I marked the section and got to work. The drywall gave with a dry crack. Behind it, old fiberglass matted with age. I peeled it back and found something else. A wooden panel. It wasn't part of the original construction. The wood was newer, nailed in place with small brass tacks. Someone had sealed it by hand. I pried at one edge until the panel groaned loose. Behind it, a narrow cavity, just wide enough for a child. The dust shifted with the light from my flashlight. In the space propped between 2 beams was a cardboard box, water-stained, bent at the corners. I pulled it out carefully and sat on the floor. Inside were a few objects, a plastic nightlight shaped like a bear, a small sock with a faded dinosaur print, and a folded piece of yellowed paper sealed with Scotch tape. On the outside, written in a child's handwriting, "For Mom." From Benny. I opened it. Dear Mommy, I was good today. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I did the trick. I said the lines and didn't mess up. He says we can go to the store soon. He said I could pick a new toy if I stop asking about home. I'm scared, but I'm trying. I know you're looking for me. I tried to yell, but the wall is thick. I think it's made special. The other man told him to make it thicker this time. He said, no mistakes like Utah. There's a light in here and a bear. I named him Cactus. I tell him about you. Please find me. I'm right next to the room. I can still hear the TV sometimes. I can hear footsteps. If you knock on the wall, I will knock back. I love you. Love, Benny. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper. Near the bottom of the cavity, I found 3 cassette reels unlabeled. 2 were cracked. 1 was intact. I sealed them in a bag and labeled it Recovered Reels, Wall Cavity 105. Then I saw the scratches. Tiny marks along the wood. Parallel. Shallow but deep enough to catch light. Finger width, maybe fingernail. Dozens of them. I backed out of the cavity, resealed the panel, and left the room as I found it. Back in 104, I logged everything. The child's letter, the physical evidence, the timeline. I noted the reinforced wall, the cavity dimensions, and the distinct absence of any mechanical ventilation. I ended the entry with a line I hadn't meant to say out loud. They called it the Princess Room. But it was never about royalty. It was about control. That night I listened to the red cassette labeled For Mom, Room 104. It was Benny's voice again, this time softer. I was good today. I earned a story. What kind one about the world ending? That phrase came up more than once. The world ending. I started pulling old case files again, not just Benny's, but others. Names I hadn't looked at in years. The motel ledgers showed repeat entries under the same aliases Shepard Mills Harmon every 6 to 8 weeks. I started cross-referencing guest dates with missing child cases within 100 miles of Elko County. By the end of the night, I had 9 names, 9 children, all between the ages of 7 and 10, all vanished within 24 to 48 hours of room 104 being booked. Only 3 were ever listed as confirmed abductions. The others were closed as custody issues, runaways, or no foul play suspected. The reports were thin. Some had a single page. One case, a girl named Haley Cruz, was marked transferred schools. Parents unavailable. But her school had no record of transfer. Her parents still lived in the same house. The sheriff at the time never followed up. The system hadn't just failed them, it had forgotten them. Late that night, I reopened my backup files and went back through a forum I hadn't touched since 2017. A message board for survivors of institutional abuse. One post caught my eye. It was from years back, written by a user with a throwaway account. They described waking up in a motel room with no memory of how they got there. Said the walls were pink. Said there was a chair in the middle of the room and a recorder running. They remembered being told the night is pretend. They remembered being called princess even though they were a boy. I cross-checked the user's IP with what I could recover it pinged from a town just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. 3 other cases I had flagged came from within that same region. Same time frame, same age range, same pattern. I sat in that room until morning. Recorder still running, vent still open. I didn't know what I was chasing anymore, a single case, a pattern, or something that had built itself into the walls. But I knew one thing. Whoever had started this, they didn't just vanish in 1984. They adapted. And I wasn't the only one who had heard something behind the wall. By the 5th day, my notes covered half the motel room wall. The corkboard wasn't enough anymore. I had taped pages to the mirror, laid photographs across the dresser, strung yarn between printouts of missing kids and guest ledger entries. The only light in the room came from the desk lamp and a narrow slit in the curtain. I kept coming back to the name Paul Harkner. The church permit. The maintenance form for the vent in 1982. The second voice on the tape. It wasn't just the timeline that fit, it was the language. The night is pretend. We don't read in the princess room. It wasn't just ritualistic, it was written. I drove to the Elko County Library and asked for records on Harkner. They didn't have much, a few mentions in newspaper archives, mostly around 1981 and 82. He'd been affiliated with a church called New Dawn Fellowship on the edge of town. Founded in 1978, operated quietly, no scandals on record. But there was one thing, a land deed. In 1981, the church had purchased a parcel labeled Echo Rock Youth Sanctuary, listed as a spiritual retreat and behavioral recovery center. It had been licensed as a short-term residential facility for at-risk youth. I wrote the coordinates down. Remote area. Ruby Mountains, high elevation. Abandoned for years. That would come later. First, I needed to talk to someone who'd been there. Through a contact at a records office in Reno, I found the name Anita Marquez. In 1986, she'd filed a report attempted abduction at a rest stop off I-80. She was 10 years old at the time. Said a man approached her with a blue duffel bag, white gloves, and a voice that kept calling her princess. She got away. The report was buried. Now she was 44, working as a preschool director in Salt Lake City. I reached out. She agreed to a video call. She appeared on screen in a clean, bright room. Calm, direct. "You're the 3rd person who's asked me about that," she said. "But the first with actual evidence. I didn't push. I just asked if she remembered what the man said." She paused, then nodded. "He said the night is pretend. You'll wake up in a better world." I asked about the gloves. "The van." "He smelled like lemon and medicine," she said. "There was a tape deck in the front seat. It was playing ocean sounds. He said I could stay in the princess room, that they'd saved it just for me." Her voice didn't shake. She'd lived with this a long time. I told her about Benny, about the tapes. "I figured I wasn't the only one," she said. "But no one ever followed up. Not really." After the call ended, I sat there for a while, recorder still running. The motel silent except for the fan. I opened one of the reels I'd found behind the wall. The intact one. I'd borrowed a refurbished reel-to-reel player from a pawn shop 2 towns over. The tape started with static, then a warped melody, a lullaby version of You Are My Sunshine. Then a voice. Volume 41. Carrie. Carrie, can you hear me? A child's voice answered. Quiet. Afraid. I want my mommy. We already talked about that, the man replied. The world is gone, but this room is safe, and now we say it together. What is the rule of pause? The night is pretend. Good girl, the man said. Now smile for me, like a princess. I stopped the tape. That name Carrie matched one of my early registry cross-references. Carrie Landers, 8 years old, disappeared in July of 1984. Guest log shows a J. Mills in room 104 2 days before. I logged the audio, time-stamped everything, and backed it up in 3 places. Then I opened the envelope from the file cabinet at the church. Inside, I'd found a photo of an intake form from Halstead Behavioral Center marked March 1983. The name on the form was Halstead Intake Condition Approved. Instructor Harkner. At the bottom, it listed key phrases. Princess Room. Visual response. Witness dissociation. This wasn't just abduction. It was process. I went back to the crawlspace behind room 105. Not inside it, I'd already removed the evidence, but just to look. I wanted to measure one last time. That's when I noticed the floorboard. Not loose, just uneven. I tapped around it and the sound shifted slightly hollow. I pried it up. Beneath it was a sealed tin box. Inside, folded paper and a child's drawing. Crayon on construction stock. A stick figure with wings. A balloon. And beneath it, written in red, I'm still here. No signature. But I recognized the handwriting. It matched Benny's letter. I scanned the page, sealed it in a protective sleeve, and added it to the corkboard. I stared at the name Echo Rock for a long time. I had the land record, the deed, the directions, and now at least 4 children confirmed: Benny, Carrie, Michael, and Haley, all connected by one room, one voice, and a phrase that kept repeating, "The night is pretend." I hadn't figured out what Echo Rock was yet, but I was getting close, and if it was still standing there was a chance something else had been left behind. I left Willow Pines early on the morning of August 12th. I had packed the night before tapes, backup drives, everything labeled and wrapped in bubble wrap. I didn't tell the motel clerk I was checking out, just dropped the key on the counter. The drive east took most of the day. By late afternoon, I was halfway up the old logging road that wrapped around the Ruby Mountains. My GPS had already lost signal. I was following the coordinates from the land deed parcel 14B listed under Echo Rock Youth Sanctuary. The road narrowed the higher I went. Pine needles blanketed the gravel. A metal gate stood open, rusted at the hinges. Beyond it, the trees thinned just enough to show a slanted roof tucked behind a ridge. The building was still there. An A-frame lodge, 2 stories tall, long abandoned. The porch had collapsed inward. The siding was faded and flaking, but the sign still hung over the main door, Echo Rock, hand-carved in uneven letters. The last K dangled like it had nearly torn free. I parked just off the gravel and walked the rest of the way. No cameras, no signs of recent maintenance. But the air smelled wrong, not fresh or stale, but heavy, like mold and pine sap, and something underneath that didn't belong. The front door creaked open with one push. Inside, the light shifted. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The main room held a long wooden table split down the middle from rot. Folded cots lined the far wall. Children's cots low to the ground, narrow frames rusted through. A blackened wood stove sat in the corner, cold. On the far wall, painted in large, now faded white letters, were the words, "We begin again," in light. There was a hallway off to the left, narrow, uneven, no light fixtures. At the end of it, a door marked reflection room. It wasn't locked. Inside, the walls had been painted white, but handprints had bled through. Dozens of them, some small, some larger. Most clustered low along the baseboards like the prints of children trying to stand. There was a crucifix on the wall, crooked. Beneath it, half buried in dust, sat a VHS tape. Cracked plastic sleeve. No label on the spine. Only 2 words written in red ink on the front, Phase 2, Final. I took it outside. Set up on the back step of the building using the portable VHS deck I'd brought. I had to run it off a backup battery. The lodge had no power. The tape was grainy, but it played. The camera had been mounted. One angle, wide shot. In the center of the frame was a folding chair. On it, a child maybe 7 or 8. Thin, pale, hard to tell gender in the light. Head down, hands folded in their lap. A voice from off-camera said, "Subject 17. Echo Rock. Time index 0341. The child didn't respond. Then another voice. "Do you remember who you were?" A pause. "No." "What room did you come from?" "The princess room." "And what did the princess room teach you?" Another pause. Then, "Not to ask." I stopped the tape. That phrase. Over and over. Not to ask. I scanned the surrounding area before going back inside. Just behind the lodge in a clearing under the trees, I found them. Stone markers, about 20 of them. Roughly spaced. No names. Each one carved with a single initial and a number. C14, M11, B8. The initials matched my list. Carrie, Michael, Benny. At the base of B8, half buried in soil, I saw something sticking out, a small metal tin, rusted at the edges. I dug it out and opened the lid. Inside, another drawing. Crayon. Faded. A stick figure with wings. A red balloon. Beneath it, "I'm still here." I resealed the box and took photos of every marker, every angle. Back in the lodge, I searched behind the fireplace. Found what looked like an old storage room, mostly empty shelves and peeled labels. But taped to one of the beams was another VHS sleeve. This one read, "Candidate 52, Studio Prep. Different location, different phase." Inside the sleeve was a form intake summary. Result resistive. Transfer recommended. Signature at the bottom, H. Renair. Same initials I'd seen earlier on the Halstead intake card. Same hand. I played the second tape. The footage had been shot in a different room. Pastel walls, a mounted camera, a single light above a child-sized chair. The room had no seams, no windows. The child in the video was a girl. She looked about 8. Her shoes were worn. Her left one matched the sock I'd found in the wall between rooms 104 and 105. The voice asked her, "Is your mom still coming?" She shook her head. "She's not coming today. What happens next?" The girl paused. "I don't want to be a princess anymore." The voice answered, "Then we'll make you something else." That was the end of the tape. No credits, no timestamp, just static. I sat on the porch steps until the sun dipped low behind the trees. I knew what I'd found. Not a shelter, not a home. This place wasn't for children. It was built to break them. The wall in room 104, that was just the first step. Echo Rock was the second. But it didn't stop here. Someone had kept going, and somewhere, maybe under another name, another phase, they still were. I left Echo Rock before sunrise. Didn't sleep. Just drove windows, cracked headlights, cutting through fog, that last phrase from the girl on the tape echoing in my head. I don't want to be a princess anymore. By the time I reached Elko, I knew where I had to go next. Halstead Behavioral Center. The same name that showed up on the intake form signed by H. Renner. The same facility that had approved Phase 2. It was still operating, still licensed, still open. Not under the same name now, it went by Halstead Family Wellness with a new logo and glossy website. But the address hadn't changed, just outside Carson City. I scheduled a tour pretending to be a family services consultant researching trauma-informed care. They didn't ask many questions. On August 15th, I walked into the building with a pocket recorder and a pen camera clipped to my shirt collar. The lobby was clean. Pale green walls, soft light, the faint scent of antiseptic and lemon polish. A receptionist in scrubs greeted me, asked me to wait. I glanced around. There were no children in sight, no sounds, just the low hum of fluorescent bulbs. A woman appeared, late 50s, neat blazer, thin smile. She introduced herself as Director Renee Harmon. The name stopped me for half a second. Harmon had been one of the guest log aliases at Willow Pines. I followed her through 2 locked doors and down a short hallway. No visible security cameras. She pointed out art therapy rooms, a common space with beanbags, a bookshelf with untouched books. It all felt too curated. Then we reached the archive room. She unlocked it with a key on a retractable cord. Inside, metal filing cabinets from floor to ceiling. "This is where we store legacy documentation," she said. "Mostly old records, nothing active." I asked if I could browse some of the historical material, told her I was looking into trends in intake phrasing. She nodded and left me alone. The cabinets were labeled by decade. I started with the 1980s, pulled a drawer marked 1983, provisional admissions, second file in Landers Carey. It listed her age 8. Admitted July 13, 1984. Referral, private care, J. Mills. I kept going. Langridge Benjamin. Marks Haley. Each file used the same intake language night session candidate. Witness reorientation phase. Then I saw a folder marked consent form templates. PH. Paul Harkner. Inside were dozens of boilerplate documents, release waivers, transfer orders, even scripts. One was titled, Night Preparation Dialogue Approved Script. It started, "Hello, Princess. Don't be afraid. The world outside is broken, but in here you are safe. In here, the night is pretend." The rest matched what I'd heard on the tapes, word for word. Behind the last page was a list, names, dozens of them. First name, last initial, and a series of dates. Most were between 1982 and 1987, but a few extended as far as 1995. The bottom had one more line transferred to Site B, CMR. I photographed everything. As I slipped the files back, one drawer caught my attention. It wasn't labeled, just slightly ajar. Inside was a locked metal case. I checked around it. Taped beneath was a small brass key. I opened it. Inside 5 VHS tapes, all numbered. Handwritten labels. One said, Session 22, Langridge. Another said Studio Entry, Phase 3. I didn't take them, not yet. I recorded them in full photos timestamp location container. Then I left the archive room and walked back toward the lobby. Director Harmon was waiting near the front desk. "You found what you needed?" she asked. I nodded. "Plenty." She gave a small smile. "Most of the past is dust now." Then she said something else. Quiet, offhand. But I heard it. He always said the recordings were the safest place to keep the memory alive. That way the work would outlast all of us. I didn't ask who he was. I just walked out. Back in my car, I uploaded the files to 2 separate cloud drives, sent one to a contact in public broadcasting, the other to a law firm I'd used once before. That night I went over everything. The names, the markers at Echo Rock, the signatures, and the voices. I played Benny's last recording again. He says I'm almost done. Says there's one more story, then I can go home. But not to the real one. A pretend one. He says if I do good, I can stay there forever. That line had haunted me from the start. But now I understood. They never planned to send the children home. They were training them to forget what home was. And the last tape confirmed it. Labeled Transition. Phase Final. A boy's voice, not Benny's. But young, maybe 7. Today is the last day. I said the words right. I wore the crown. I kept the tape on. The voice hesitated. He said the next room has stars on the ceiling, and that I won't remember him anymore. A door creaked in the background. Footsteps. Then silence. That's where the tape ended. There were no stars on the ceiling, just a dark room behind a wall, and a system designed to erase the truth child by child, tape by tape. The first to act wasn't the FBI. It was a civil attorney from Reno. I'd sent her the files 2 weeks earlier, the tapes, the transcripts, photos of the graves at Echo Rock, copies of the Halstead intake forms. She called me after reviewing everything, said she'd seen abuse cases but nothing with this level of planning, nothing this calculated. She filed for a protective order on behalf of 3 families' parents of children who'd gone missing between 1983 and 1986. Each had received anonymous tips in the past. Each had been told there wasn't enough evidence to reopen their cases. Now there was. By the end of August, Nevada State Police had issued warrants for 2 properties: the Halstead Center near Carson City, and the old administrative building tied to New Dawn Fellowship, now registered under a private nonprofit. They moved quickly, quietly. When the warrants were served, one of the Halstead staff members, a man named Clark Vensler, tried to dispose of documents in a supply room shredder. They stopped him mid-process. What they recovered filled 6 file boxes. The most important was a ledger labeled Studio Conversion Records. Each entry listed a child by first name and last initial, followed by dates, session types, and phase numbers. Benny, Carrie, Michael, Haley. They were all there, along with 32 more. Every entry included a final note archived. No official record of release. No reunification reports. Just archived. Director Renee Harmon was brought in for questioning on September 4th. She didn't ask for an attorney, spoke plainly, said she had inherited the system, said the procedures had been grandfathered in. She described phase prep as a sensory detachment program designed by a man named Paul Harkner and later modified by Harold Renier, a clinical psychologist who disappeared from state licensing roles in 1991. When asked about the tapes, she said they were used for recall calibration. That was her phrase. Recall calibration. The interview ended with Harmon saying it wasn't punishment. They were meant to forget. She was charged with obstruction and destruction of evidence. Not homicide, not trafficking, just obstruction. The graves at Echo Rock were exhumed under federal supervision. Forensics teams confirmed at least 16 distinct remains, most under the age of 12. The soil showed traces of barbiturates. The report used the term induced hypoxia. I didn't attend the press conference. I watched it from a motel room near the Utah border. They called the operation phase recovery. Spokespeople said they would bring closure to the families. But no one used the word murder. No one named Benny. A month later, I got a call from a former Willow Pines maintenance worker. Said he remembered replacing tiles in room 105 sometime in the mid-'80s. Said a supervisor gave him a set of instructions: reinforce the floorboards, reseal the vent, and install a recording unit behind the wall. He'd asked why. The supervisor told him, "The room's not real, it's part of the program." He remembered that line, word for word. I asked him what happened to the supervisor. He said the man disappeared in 1987, took early retirement, left no forwarding address. Halstead closed its doors on November 2nd. The property was transferred to the state. Volunteers from 4 counties gathered at Echo Rock the following week. I was there. We marked the graves with proper headstones. Each one had a name, a birth year, and a short phrase beneath. Benny's read, "You were always real." Then we burned the building down. Local officials approved the demolition, said the structure was unsafe. No one objected. The flames reached 30 feet before the roof collapsed inward. It didn't feel like justice, but it felt like something. Later, I sent a package to each of the surviving families. Inside a digitized copy of the tapes maps of the site and transcriptions of every intake form I'd found. No commentary, no notes, just the truth. Some reached out, some didn't. But I heard from Anita again. She sent me a photo, a drawing done by one of her students. Stick figure, wings, a red balloon. She didn't write anything else. She didn't have to. I still think about the wall in room 104, the narrow space between the drywall and the floorboards where I first found the sock, the part of the building that didn't show up on the blueprints. It's gone now. Echo Rock is ash. Halstead is boarded up. The signs have changed. The names have changed. But sometimes when it's quiet and the house settles at night, I still hear the sound of a tape clicking to an end. Not every child from that list has been found. Some graves were never recovered. Some names were never more than initials on a ledger. But a few Benny Carey Haley, they're not forgotten. They never will be. Their drawings sit in a file on my shelf, wrapped in archival paper. And that final tape, the one where the boy said he wouldn't remember. I keep a copy of that too. I don't play it often, but I keep it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret going back, if I regret digging so far into something that didn't belong to me, and I always say no, because someone had to stay in the story long enough to see the ending, not the legal ending. That part was flawed from the start. There were loopholes and delays and names never charged. But I'm not talking about justice in a courtroom. I'm talking about memory. Someone had to say the names out loud, write them down, mark the place where the world tried to erase them. There's a photo that Anita keeps now, the drawing of the stick figure with the wings. I think about that one more than I thought I would. Not because it's sad, because it's true. The child who drew that still believed in flight, still believed that something could carry them out of that place, even if the world didn't come, even if no one opened the door. That drawing outlived the program, outlived the scripts, outlived the people who signed the intake forms. It mattered. And I guess if this story says anything, it's this. The systems that hurt them were built by people, which means they can be dismantled, and really remembering is the first step. So if this story stayed with you, consider sharing it, so no voice gets buried, so no name gets erased. Because somewhere even now there are rooms without doors, and somewhere someone is still whispering, "Don't ask. We have to. We always have to."